Cards that cheat on energy. In Axie Infinity, the most valuable resource is energy. In general, it is safe to say that if you have more energy than your opponent, you are always going to win, all else being equal. You could even say that one of the goals of this game is to always try to stay ahead of your enemy's energy count, so that you can play more cards than your opponent and kill your enemies before they kill you. Therefore, cards that manipulate energy either for yourself or your opponent are automatically better cards. The general rule is this: if the card you play will result in you having more energy than your opponent, it is a good card. But this is not the only rule. You also need to take into consideration what we have talked about before, which is card stats. Stats do matter. If your card only generates energy but does nothing else, then it is not necessarily a better card. You must remember that an Axie is limited to 4 cards a turn. Therefore, every card is precious. If your card doesn't give enough value, then it is not necessarily a good card, even if it generates you energy. Currently, there are a few ways you can manipulate energy. Cards that gain energy. Cards that make your opponent lose energy. Cards that cause your opponent to spend more energy than you. And cards that are zero cost. Cards that gain energy. At the moment, these are the only cards that can gain energy: Nemo, Cottontail, Leafburg, Watering Can, and Imp. Of these cards, Nemo, Cottontail, and Leafburg are the only cards that give you net positive energy without any difficult conditions. Watering Can and Imp are conditional cards, but if you pull them off, they have the potential to give you an energy gain. As you can see, a few of these cards in the list are already popular cards in the current meta. However, out of these cards, some are obviously better than the others, while some are just simply average. Nemo needs no introduction. It deals a bit of damage, costs 0, and nets you an energy. Playing Nemo is never going to be bad. It is a great card. And so is Cottontail. In the past, Cottontail used to be bad because it had no stats, but now it gives 30 shields in the Season 19 patch change. This puts it just as good as Nemo, if not better. The only reason it sees less play is because it is a beast card, and as you have learned previously, stats matter. Nemo, being an aqua card, gives the Axie more speed versus Cottontail, and people may not play Cottontail because of that. Leafburg is also easy to understand. It gives you 40 stats, gives you an energy for free. It's simply an amazing card. Watering Can is a decent card. It has very decent stats. 125 stats that can potentially give you energy is amazing. But of course, the only reason stopping it from becoming an absolutely insane card is the very narrow ability. Having said that, in a meta with a lot of aquas, your Watering Can is going to be an MVP. And the decent stats on it make it acceptable even if you don't need any aquas. This card is firmly above average. Imp needs no introduction. This card has been a staple of Rim Beasts for the longest time. Although, just like Watering Can, it is a highly conditional card, and in most cases, you only gain back 1 energy if you paired it with a Ronin. If that happens, it makes Imp at best a zero cost card because you spend 1 energy to gain 1 energy back. Not to mention, the stats on Imp is only 110, which makes it rather low. It is for these reasons that Imp has always been a low to mid tier card. But wait, where are the other cards? You may be wondering, what about cards like Sirius or Carrot? Well, we will discuss these later because these cards are actually not cards that gain you energy. Just because they have the word gain 1 energy in the description doesn't automatically make it a card that gains you energy. Cards that make your opponent lose energy. In this section, I'll list out the cards that make your opponent lose energy. These are Sirius, Rice, Antenna, Golda. Well, you might be wondering, what? That's it? Where are all the other cards? Well, in due time. Here are the facts. Any card that steals energy from your opponent is essentially a zero-cost card that makes your enemy lose 1 energy. This is because you have to spend 1 energy to get 1 energy back. Now if you listen to that again, any card that steals energy from your opponent is essentially a zero-cost card that makes your enemy lose 1 energy. This mechanic is strictly a worse version of cards that gain you energy. The reason being is, if your opponent has no energy to steal, your card essentially has diminished value. Remember, the whole point is to get ahead of your opponent in terms of energy. But if your opponent has no energy to steal, you essentially spend 1 energy to do nothing to your opponent, which is a very bad deal. Of these 3 cards, Antenna is the most decent one of all because it has 130 card stats. At least, even if you don't destroy any of your opponent's energy, you still have an okayish card. But the drawback is, you have to commit to having other Antenna cards, which makes this a not so good choice because you then have to compete with a lot of other premium pawn cards. And if you ever find yourself in a position where you cannot chain the Antenna, it turns into an underwhelming card. The worst card is in fact Sirius, because it only gives you 60 total stats, which is absolutely horrible. You'll often see a lot of pros saying that Sirius is really not as good as people say it is. And they are right. Sirius is a useless card if your opponent has no energy to steal, and the card stats is very poor. The only reason Sirius is seeing so much play is because it is the best mouth card for plant axes, and by far. Now that's rather unfortunate. If one day there was a new better mouth card for plants, I'm very sure Sirius will go down in value. Rice is pretty much an Antenna, but without any harsh conditions for activation. This means you can play it on a standalone Axie if you wish, but the rather mediocre stats make it just a mediocre card. It definitely isn't as bad as Sirius, and neither is it super good that you want it on every tail slot. There's definitely better tail cards out there. Golda gets a special mention because it doesn't really fit anywhere else. It doesn't steal energy, but instead destroys energy. In terms of manipulating energy, this makes it a strictly worse version of Rice, because you're not really net positive in terms of the energy race. You spend 1 energy to destroy 1 energy, which doesn't really put you ahead. But it at least has 120 stats, which is decent. And it is a beast card, which makes it useful against all the plants and reptiles. It occupies a mouse slot, which usually doesn't have many competitive cards. And most importantly, it doesn't have any harsh activation conditions. All of these factors combined make Golda surprisingly the best card in this category of cards that make your opponent lose energy. I would say Golda is a very balanced card. If it had any higher stats, it would probably make Golda an S tier card, but because it doesn't, it would have to be at best an A tier card. And because it doesn't have any special game-breaking mechanics like Fear or Stun, I personally rank this a high B to a low A tier. In terms of power ranking, you can easily say in the order of greatness, Golda, Rice, Antenna, and Sirius. cards that cause your opponent to spend more energy than you. As this section implies, there exist cards in this game that makes your opponent spend more cards and energy in order to do anything meaningful, which means they often have to spend 2 or more energy or cards in order to counter one of your cards. This is not apparent to most players because they don't explicitly mention lose or gain energy in its card's description, but in actual fact, they function the same as cards that make your opponent lose energy. I put these cards in their own category because they function like cards that make your opponent lose energy, but they don't come with any of the same drawbacks. Because of this reason, the cards in this category are the best energy manipulators in the game currently. In particular, cards that apply the following debuff are in fact some of the most powerful cards in Axie Infinity: Fear, Stun. Let's look at the cards that apply Fear or Stun: Chomp, Fishneck, Snail Shell, Balloon, Cute Bunny, Caterpillars. Do you notice a pattern here? All of the cards here are cards from top tier meta builds that has dominated top ranking in seasons in one way or another. Let's take a look why. The Fear and Stun debuff are particularly nasty because they make your opponent miss one attack. In other words, your opponent must spend 1 energy and 1 card doing absolutely nothing just to remove the debuff, essentially losing 1 energy and 1 card. The main difference that makes these cards top tier compared to other energy manipulating cards is the fact that these cards have very good stats in general, and they have no apparent drawbacks like those in the category of cards that make your opponent lose energy. You can think of Chomp as having a total of 125 stats and make your opponent lose 1 energy and 1 card, which is simply amazing. Cute Bunny has 135 stats and makes your opponent lose 2 energy and 2 cards, which is absolutely insane. Fishnecks and Caterpillars has 150 stats, which makes it a good card even if you somehow don't trigger the ability. Balloon deals 40 damage and makes your opponent lose 1 energy, and since this card by itself costs no energy, therefore it makes you net positive on energy even more. And most importantly, these cards don't have any serious drawbacks or harsh activation conditions on them. They simply work most of the time. Just try comparing these cards to the likes of Sirius, Rice, and Antenna. And the list doesn't end here. Let's have a look at these cards: Eggshell, Snake Jar, Red Ear, and Pumpkin. These cards are actually just as good as making your opponent lose energy, because they essentially trade 1 of your energy for 2 or more of your opponent's, with the exception that it requires a higher skill to play. Eggshell is famous for clutch plays if timed correctly. You could potentially sacrifice your bird with 1 eggshell to counter an enemy who's trying to 4-card combo your other Axies. In a way, you're actually spending 1 energy to burn 4 of your opponent's energy and cards. Snake Jar is often a 2 for 1 card, because you force your opponent to waste 1 card countering Snake Jar's effect. And the same can be said for very high shield cards like Red Ear and Pumpkin. By playing one of these high shield cards, your opponent must always spend 2 cards if they want to damage your Axie, since most high damage cards top out at about 130 base damage, but high shield cards usually have about 120 or more shields. Playing one of these cards when your Axie is about to die will almost always be a 2 for 1 benefit. Cards that are 0 cost. As you have learned by now, the whole goal is to be ahead of your opponents in terms of energy, and that is so that you can play more cards than your opponents. 0 cost cards allow you to play more cards than your opponent without spending energy, which fits the goal and therefore classifying it as an energy manipulator. 0 cost cards can be split into 2 categories: real 0 cost cards and fake 0 cost cards. Real zero-cost cards are cards like Balloon, Post-Fight, Cuckoo, Nemo, Hero, Twin-Tail, Pinsir, Biden's, Cattail, Pupae, etc. You can find a whole list of them on the web. What I really want to talk about are the fake zero-cost cards. These cards are the ones that gain you 1 energy back when you use them. In particular, they are Kotaro, Iguana, and Carrot. Of these 2 types of zero-cost cards, the fake zero-cost cards are actually some of the worst cards in the game because there are harsh conditions attached to them. And if these conditions don't happen, they just become regular cards. Because of this, they usually aren't very good cards in the grand scheme of things. After all, who would want a conditional card that has the potential to turn into a bad card? I personally wouldn't recommend playing them. As you can see, most of these fake zero-cost cards don't have the best stats on them, which is kind of the main problem with the fake zero-cost cards. If these cards had good stats on them, then at least if you don't trigger the energy gain, you can still get decent stats. But as it is right now, most of these cards are just underwhelming. I'm sure you understand the benefits of having a zero-cost card. The only real problem with most zero-cost cards is that they usually have very bad card stats on them. And as we know by now, stats matter. So you might think, since zero-cost cards have so little stats in them, are they maybe just borderline worth it? Should I really play them? The answer to that is surprisingly an overwhelming yes. In fact, right now, zero-cost cards have an even more important role than simply being an energy manipulator. They are very important because they help counter or at least give you a fighting chance against other energy cheaters. At the moment, true zero-cost cards are the most efficient counters to energy manipulating cards. When you are behind on energy, a zero-cost card can help you stabilize the race by allowing you to play more cards for free. On top of that, playing a zero-cost card negates the very dangerous stun and fear debuffs. This way, you don't waste any energy and your opponent doesn't get any extra value out of their stun and fear cards. Without a zero-cost card in your arsenal, you are almost always going to lose the energy race. Therefore, if you do not play any energy manipulators, you must always play zero-cost cards as a means to cheat energy yourself. In fact, it is recommended to play energy manipulators and zero-cost cards together to make your deck extremely resilient against energy manipulators, while also punishing opponents who are not energy efficient. In summary, cards that cheat energy are generally top-tier cards. There are 4 types of energy cheaters: cards that gain energy, cards that make your opponent lose energy, cards that cause your opponent to spend more energy than you, and cards that are zero cost. Of all these energy manipulators, zero cost cards are the most powerful. If you don't play any energy manipulators, you must play at least true zero cost cards to have a chance at competing against better decks. In fact, it is recommended to play energy manipulators and zero cost cards together.